At least these stage lights ain't too hot. It's kind of nice.
Well, and I feel the AC tonight, too.
Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome to the Trailer Park Show.
All right.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. What did I tell you, Fred? Well, he wanted to make for sure that he was on the left, but I told him on television he'll be on the right. But he still may not be a conservative, but that's okay. It's not all about that tonight. So it's not about the left or the right. Tonight is just going to be an awesome time. So I have my two co-hosts here, Mike Lee. Everyone know Mike Lee with Right Talk, Mike.
Nobody knows me.
Oh, everybody know Mike Lee.
I'm just a guy.
Everybody know Gavino with El Concilio. And then on my left, but on the television right, is Dr. Fred McGhee. Everyone know who Fred is. I teased him this afternoon because it's been a while since I've seen him. He's like, where you been? I said in 5'3", so where you been, 4'1"? So he's been in 4'1", my old hood. So anyway, and then of course, you know, on my right, but which on television is on the left, is Nelson Linder. And so we have a great show tonight. We're going to talk about a myriad of things that has to do with Austin and Austin's history and so forth. And so our guests are going to introduce themselves and say what it is that they're doing and what they do. So why don't we start with you, Dr. McGhee?
Well, hello, and hello, people in TV land, cable access television land. How are you? My name is Fred McGhee, and I'm extremely honored to be here and pleased to be back on this forum. So thank you very much to you, Marilyn, and to the co-hosts. I'm here tonight to talk about public housing. I'm here to talk about this, a jewel in the violet crown. Let me hold up for the camera. There we go. A jewel in the violet crown, a people's plan to preserve Austin's public housing, and about public housing history more generally. For almost 25 years now, I have documented the role of American public housing in 20th century African American history and culture. As an advocate, I've also been involved in a whole range of advocacy efforts to preserve public housing, not just in Austin, but in other cities around the United States. Nothing quite explains urban dynamics, modern urban dynamics, in the United States in particular, than public housing. If you want to find out the truth, in other words, about what a city truly is instead of what it says it is, go to what a hood is.
That's amazing.
Okay.
So, but Fred, tell us what it is that you do. What is your business?
Well, I am an African-American business pioneer in a field known as cultural resources management. My
Awesome.
company, founded in 2002, remains the only African-American and disabled veteran-owned company in the United States that does what's known as environmental impact analysis and cultural resources management.
Wow.
So I have a PhD in archaeology, one of the first to obtain that. During my military career, I was one of the first African-Americans to become a U.S. Navy diving officer.
That is awesome. And our other guest here is Nelson Linder. Nelson, please tell us what it is that you do.
A couple of things. I'm currently the president of the Austin NAACP. I'm also the owner of the Linder Insurance Agency. This is my 16th year on that agency. Came here in '81, been involved in civil rights for a long time. Houston Tilson graduate. I've been active in police issues here, economic empowerment, you name it. So I'm happy to be here. We'll talk more about what I do later, but honored to be here. Looking forward to a very important conversation.
That is awesome. Now, everyone knows Gabino as well. You want to just talk quickly about what's happening in your world real fast?
Oh my God, there's a lot of things whirling around in my world nowadays. Yes, I'm pleased to be here with this panel to discuss basically what it is land use. Mm-hmm. Land use and how, and we as, that's why we as an organization name ourselves El Concilio Mexican American Landowners, the East Austin from East Austin. A lot of us are Austin natives, born and raised here. Mm. And we've had this fight in maintaining our land for many, many years. It's an ongoing battle. And the Holly Power Plant was located next to our property, so many people, it wasn't a desirable place to live. Mm-hmm. Now that it's gone, it's a totally different world.
Oh,
but
you wouldn't even recognize it.
But that's our base.
Your hood.
That's our base foundation. We have families, Montopolis, Govalle, all that area. And we joined LULAC to leverage many of our local issues to a national level. So we're also, the majority of our neighborhood associations are registered and members of LULAC, League of United Latin Americans.
Awesome. Mike, you want to share something quickly about what's happening with?
Sure. I'm Mike Lee. I'm Director of Outreach and Engagement for the Travis County Republican Party. And in that capacity, I do outreach work in Travis, Williamson, Bastrop, Hayes, and Caldwell County.
Wow, that is nice.
But I'm interested. I've always had an interest in public housing, but I guess I got a special interest in it when I was working on the campaign of Congressman Mickey Leland back in Houston, in Houston back in 1982. And at that time, there was a public housing project on Allen Parkway in Houston.
I know all about it.
And there was a big stink about what's going to happen to Allen Parkway. And I thought about that again when I was on the African American Resource Advisory Commission with Nelson. And I thought about, it seems to me that land has always put this highest economic use. And I thought about that. When I thought about that, I thought, well, the project down here, not too far from the station, is going to be gone. And soon Booker T. Washington High School, it's going to be gone. And I thought back about my experience working with Mickey, and on Mickey's campaign. I said, I remember Allen Parkway, they were fussing about that. This is back in 1982, this is 30 years ago, right? And then I was back in Houston again in 2008, 7 or 8. And I went back, had occasion to go back out by Allen Parkway. And now they got like $350,000 condos here. So I kind of know what I don't know what all happened, because a lot of it happened when I was going back to Ohio. But I know those public housing projects is no longer there.
Total transformation.
And drawn on that, I figure that is probably what's going to happen here.
Well, let's talk it. Let's bring it home to Austin. Fred, what is happening with the projects, and tell me which projects you want to talk about.
Well, all of them really, because the Austin Housing Authority has decided that it's going to deaccession its entire portfolio. It's going to privatize and marketize every housing project it has. It's starting with the ones that are most valuable and that it owns outright, which are the first three. Okay, so that's going to be Rosewood Courts, Chalmers Courts, both of which have gone through the city council and which have been approved for demolition, or, well, for the initial stages of providing the certain types of regulatory certainty that would make it attractive for private real estate developers to understand what the future intent is. Let me be more specific about that, okay?
Wow.
So, and that's because those housing projects sit now on valuable real estate. You can generate the most money by privatizing and marketizing those. That wasn't the case when they were first built. When they were first built, they were scarcely in the city limits, especially Rosewood. So, Austin is privileged to have historic public housing. It's not like a lot of other cities that came into the game somewhat later. Austin has the oldest housing authority of in the United States.
Really?
Yeah. Under the United States Housing Act of 1937, Austin, Texas is the first city to finish construction of Santa Rita Courts, which was the first one to finish construction and to actually move in a family into a public housing unit in the summer of 1939. Rosewood Court started construction on the same day as Santa Rita Courts, but because it was bigger and was on a more challenging site, it didn't finish until a few months later. And it was segregated. Santa Rita was for Mexican Americans, or Mexicans as they were known at the time. Rosewood was for African Americans, or Negroes. It's called Negro Housing Project on the plans. And Chalmers was for whites.
Wow.
It was a revolution in Austin, this housing. Remember, in Austin, at the 1930 census, Austin had a population of about 55,000 people. Okay. At the 1940 census, it had a population of about 88,000. So we were a small regional capital in what was then known as the Southwest. Okay. So most of Austin's design community had no conception whatsoever of national and international standards of large-scale housing construction. Okay, zoning had just come alive as a result of the 1928 master plan, which established or said that we were going to be doing zoning, but not in the segregated parts of town. In the Negro district, zoning didn't exist, and Rosewood was built without building permits, never mind zoning. They had to establish the zoning to get it built. There are no building permits on file at the city for the construction of Rosewood or any of our initial public housing.
Well, at that time, wasn't had it already been pretty much done by council to segregate Austin?
Well, that officially took place with the
25?
with the 28 master plan.
28, okay.
The 28 master plan created the so-called Negro district. Okay, and Rosewood was in the Negro district. Matter of fact, Rosewood was a cornerstone of implementing that Negro district strategy because it gave black people a place to go to. Okay, so whites who were dominant at the time, who could run things, would say, here you go. Here's a housing project for you to go to. This is the part of town that we want you to live. So if you live in Wheatsville or Clarksville, because we're not going to support those anymore. You're not going to get the schools. You're not going to get the water and sewer. You're not going to get your trash picked up. But if you move over here, we'll get it for you.
Because there were a lot of African Americans in Clarksville.
Yes. That's what the 28 master plan did. The 28 master plan had language in it that said the design was to encourage blacks to move to East Austin. You could not outright on a map draw a red line and say only this part for whites, only this part for blacks. By that point, that had been found illegal by the Supreme Court. So you had to use subterfuge. You had to use, you couldn't use the hard edge of Jim Crow. You had to use the softer edge of Jim Crow. Okay, and the softer edge of Jim Crow was what Austin did, and what a lot of cities in the South did. Okay, similar to the Gentleman's Agreement, which was a political manifestation of this, which was quote unquote technically legal, okay, but achieved the desired objective. Okay, and that's what our public housing is. Now that said, in objective terms, the public housing that was constructed here was light years ahead of anything that had existed here. It was built to international style modernist standards, the first multifamily housing in Austin to be built to those standards. It had interior gas, which was a luxury at the time. Remember, this was during the Great Depression. There were people still at that time in Austin living in caves.
Oh, wow.
Okay, people built ramshackle shacks, okay, with dirt floors, with available off-the-shelf materials, and built the best that they could, drawing water from a common well. It was slum conditions, quite frankly, okay? This housing did rectify that situation to a large extent, and it injected a significant amount of both physical and financial capital into the city, but it also projected a certain sense of Roosevelt optimism into Great Depression Austin. Now, what's underappreciated is the degree to which this established standards for real estate in Austin ever after. Okay? It was the first time that Austin's architects and builders understood how bigger cities, like in New York, in Philadelphia, Boston, okay, actually built stuff. At that time in Austin, if you wanted to build something, you could do whatever you wanted for the most part, and government left you alone. Okay? The government, the federal government, in exchange for this housing coming to Austin, had various requirements. Okay? One of them is that the property be zoned correctly. Okay? So the city of Austin, the City Plan Commission, as it was called at that time, there was no planning commission. The planning commission didn't come into being until 1945. Okay? Before that, it was called the City Plan Commission, and it was chaired by Hugo Kuhne, the iconic Austin architect. And in conjunction with federal officials, the city of Austin got its house in order and site selected, financed, zoned, and in other ways got the site properly ready so that the federal money could come from Washington so that construction could begin in this public housing. That was a revolution. Okay, I mean, Hugo Kuhne himself didn't know the international style. That was a brand new thing.
I've seen his name on several buildings in Austin. That name just sounds so familiar.
Oh, a very iconic German immigrant family. He designed the Austin History Center, okay, which was at the time in the 1930s the actual Austin Public Library. Okay, he designed many, many public buildings in Austin and many private structures, including he was the chief architect for this housing project for Rosewood Courts. As well as for other housing projects in the city. So he was, for a long time, the most powerful architect in the city. He helped establish the School of Architecture at the University of Texas. Wow. He himself went to MIT. This is in the early 20th century.
That is amazing.
He's a very important figure in local terms. But in terms of this housing being in the so-called international style, he had to be brought along. There was a gentleman who worked in the newly established United States Housing Authority named O.C. Winston, who was a local boy. He worked for the feds in Roosevelt's great New Deal in the United States Housing Authority, but he was actually from Central Texas. He was from Smithville and got his architecture degree at the Rice Institute. And understood what this New Deal housing was. He had gone to Europe. Other people affiliated with the USHA, the United States Housing Authority, had spent time in Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, and elsewhere, and in the UK, where this housing was being constructed, millions of units, okay, over 5 million units of housing were built in Europe in the interwar years. That served as the basis for this housing that was coming to the United States. And he's the one who educated Austin's local architects and builders about what made this housing different from, you know, the craftsman house, okay? These other sorts of things. This was mass housing. In other words, this was housing for the people on a large, it was multifamily housing, high design multifamily housing in the truest sense. It had things in it that we take for granted today, such as passive solar heating, various other forms of green belting to ensure ventilation and other sorts of things. I could go on and on, but
Well,
you get
that's
the
a
picture.
great history that you're giving us. Now, let's get up to current of what's happening. Why is it that the city wants to tear these projects down?
Because it says
Money.
that they, well, money, sure. Money, yes. You know, like every housing authority before it, in Atlanta, in Houston, in Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Boston, no matter where you go, the script is always the same. Number one, the housing is so horrible and obsolete that we can no longer keep it up. Okay, the pipes are failing, the toilets don't flush, the elevators don't work, although these don't have elevators, these are 1- and 2-story walk-ups. But that was certainly the story at Cabrini Green. Number two, look at what they could have. That's the narrative. Look at what could be the case, okay? The idea being is that public housing is obsolete, no longer, you know, worth a damn. And we need to privatize it and marketize it because even public housing residents, A, deserve better, and B, could have better if we just got with the program, remove these structures out of the nation's public housing program, which is no longer being financed either by Republicans or Democrats, and build something new.
Okay, so here's the deal, and I'm going to ask you something on this too in just a minute, Nelson. The thing of it is that if you take the projects and you tear them down, you're not going to build any more housing that's that is affordable. We know what's going to go up in those places.
Well, that's the key to understand. You just said the magic word, affordable. Okay?
So all these people will be displaced.
They will be displaced, and they will not go. What will happen to them is that they will either get a Section 8 voucher or they will move someplace else. And they will be just as segregated as they were before, and their material conditions in most cases will not improve. We have data on this going back now for many, many years. In Chicago, for instance, after all of the money that Chicago spent to destroy Cabrini Green and all of Cabrini Extension and to put those $3,500 a month condos there now, what percent do you think of the people who used to live there have gone back to a housing unit anywhere near there? It's around 12%. And that's the pattern that you find in city after city. So, you know, it's displacement, plain and simple. It's to get rid of public housing, which, let me make this clear, is rent controlled.
Oh,
People, you know, let me make that clear. It's rent controlled, okay? Statutorily so. One of the reasons is because of the Frost-Leland Amendment, okay? But it's so meaning that it's a percentage of your income. So if you make $1,000 a month in Social Security, your rent is capped at 30%, $300. Let's say something happens, your Social Security or an SSI gets cut back to $500 a month. Your rent will decrease. It doesn't change. That's rent control, okay? That's technically not quote-unquote legal in the state of Texas or in the city of Austin, but it is in our public housing because it's federal housing.
that is amazing. Okay, Nelson, I want to ask you a question, but now that you say that, I've been holding this for quite some time. Okay, probably for the past 10 years, we know when you're driving in the city of Boston, you see these signs on the side of the road. Why rent when you can buy? If you make, and it used to say $1,000 a month, you can buy a house. Went up to $1,500 a month, you can buy a home. Why is it that the sign now say $5,000? If you make $5,000 a month, you can buy a home. Why rent when you can buy? And I'm like, who are they speaking to?
I've talked enough. I know Nelson knows as much about
Nelson,
this as anybody. So
Why don't you
I'm
talk
gonna
about
be
the
quiet for a
projects
second.
first, and then later on we can go back to that question. It's just amazing of how high the rent is in Austin.
Well, we know who they're talking to. They've already created the conditions, so. Let me just say this. This is the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Ordinance. It was coined by Dr. King in '68. He had a vivid idea of what housing should be for folks who are low income and poor. And so as a result, LBJ embraced the idea and got it passed in our Congress. The problem is it was laid out properly, but it never did really fully implement it. So as a result, 50 years later, we have a mess. We have people being kicked out of our cities all over the country because the city governments basically didn't enforce the idea. Back to Fred's point of view, you see, housing is the most critical thing. It's the most critical thing. And he's right. It tells you everything about a city. Now, coming to Austin, just look at Austin today. When I came here in '81, East Austin was fairly vibrant, mostly black and brown community. First, it went through a stage of revitalization. That's the doorway. You build up the infrastructure where certain folks can come in and invest, which they did. The second stage is gentrification. So in reality, the first gate was revitalization, then gentrification. The problem is, mention these housing projects. See, the city of Austin neglected all those projects all these years. So if you neglect these projects, what's going to happen? They're going to deteriorate. So then you make the perfect argument to tear them down. But so we have to keep it in context. Now, my whole thing is, look, really, we got to hold people accountable. And we can legally, but it starts at the city council level. You see, this is a case where you have a lack of city council leadership. In our district, with proper leadership, we could have been out front and addressed a lot of these issues by reinvesting in the communities, but that hasn't been argued. As a result, the money people, the power brokers, the so-called Austin Housing Authority, which is really an alter ego to city council, these guys are all doing this stuff together. But we haven't addressed that. And on the other hand, then there's the residents. They could abuse everybody. I mean, let's face it. Everybody wants decent housing. These are poor folks. They don't have any resources or money, so they're afraid. What are they going to do? So they're going to accept the city council deal because they know how they've been treated. We have to be very, very careful and put out all the elements, the housing authority, city of Austin, residents, and take care of these people, but we haven't done that. So to make a long story short, that's why right now this housing thing is the most important issue in the country. We talk about things like Code Next. What the hell is Code Next? Well, we know what Code Next is. It's the new frontier, another form of gentrification.
It's the next screw
We
job.
have to call it out what it is, because what's going to happen is really you change the zoning. Guess what? You put these condos and these multifamily dwellings on people's property. You raise the property taxes again. You push people out. It's the same thing, a different form. We have to address that on a government level. We need people in power and government who have the ability, first of all, to write policies. And second, we have the courage to build viable coalitions. And thirdly, get enough votes to try to help poor people out. And that's why I want to hear Fred talk about the Poor People's Campaign, which is a good campaign. The problem is these things are coming from the outside in. They should be coming from the inside out. But we're not getting that. So everything is a fight here. And as a result, the people lose.
And we need to, before we leave, we need to address it to the residents that live in these particular projects that are going to be torn down, or proposed to be torn down.
No, let me make a point about that.
Yeah.
I'm speaking here now, not just in Austin, okay, and the current fight to preserve Rosewood Courts and our other housing projects. I'm speaking here about my extensive experience in Houston and Allen Parkway Village, at Techwood in Atlanta, at Kuhio Park Terrace in Honolulu. I could talk to you at length about some of these things. The residents are pawns in the game. I'll be perfectly frank with you. And it is extremely cynical for them to be manipulated by housing authority officials and HUD officials in the way that they are manipulated. There is a serious lack of accountability and democracy within housing authority management, not just in Austin, but across the board. This is true even in a city like New York City, which has the nation's largest housing authority. Okay. The truth is that many of the residents who are housing authority residents now, they weren't residents 5 years ago, and they will not be housing authority residents in 5 years. One of the reasons is because that's HACA policy. That's HUD policy. You see, public housing in America is supposed to be a transitory state to self-sufficiency.
Okay.
We are not other countries like in the UK and in other European countries where you have a right to housing. Did you know, for instance, that in the UK, that if you are homeless, you have a right to shelter? Okay? In other words, they passed a law that said you do not have to live out on the street. Okay? You have a right to shelter. And also, council housing, as it's called in the UK, is income neutral. It's not technically housing for poor people. Okay? It's one of the most important parts of the British welfare state. In the United States, over time, that became something else. The U.S. actually started with a similar spirit. The original first-generation public housing, like Austin's, was high-design public housing. It was underfunded, make no mistake about that. It was not lavishly funded, especially compared to the housing built in the earlier New Deal, which was built by the Public Works Administration, stuff like Langston Terrace in Washington, D.C., okay? Those were very high design, had murals and all kinds of stuff in
Well,
them.
if it was temporary, if it was designed to be temporary, why didn't they give the tenants a certain amount of time to stay there? If it's designed to be temporary, it's not designed for you to live or retire there.
Well, it
so then-
became less than temporary. Remember, public housing was segregated, okay, until the 1960s. As Nelson alluded to earlier, in Austin, one of the biggest fights was over Austin's local fair housing ordinance, which tiered off of the Federal Fair Housing Act, okay? Now, everybody likes to talk about the biggest referendum in America or in Austin history being the SOS ordinance. That's not even close to true. You know what was actually the biggest single referendum in the history of Austin? It was the fight over the fair housing ordinance in the late 1960s, okay, which ultimately produced Roy Butler as mayor and the Gentleman's Agreement. Okay, few things point to the racism in Austin more than the fight over that ordinance. That ordinance took, a lot of doing to get passed, and a lot of hard work by the NAACP and the newly established Human Relations Commission to get that done. Okay, and the white overlords of Austin were not going to have it, and they organized a referendum, and they literally ran ads in the paper that said that this was forced integration, forced public housing, as they called it. And they would call you on the phone and be like, do you want to, N-word living next to you? This kind of thing, okay? It was ugly, brutal. It exposed the racist underbelly of Austin, and that ordinance was overturned, okay? One of the most shameful episodes in this city's history in a record vote, okay? So, we have to keep our eye on that. And what ended up happening is that public housing over time became identified with black people. In Chicago, at the time that the Chicago Plan for Transformation was implemented, almost 100% of Chicago's public housing was occupied by African Americans.
Wow,
100%.
that is
Okay.
amazing.
And in Austin's public housing is disproportionately occupied by black and brown people. You will not find many white people living in public housing. But that didn't used to be the case. Okay, so over time it became that for complicated reasons. Allen Parkway Village has an interesting history as well, because in the early 80s you had a lot of Vietnamese who were being moved into Allen Parkway Village, and resident council meetings had to be conducted in 3 different languages, English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. That was done deliberately to break up the racial and ethnic solidarity of the housing project, so that the administration of the city of Houston and Hatch, the Houston Housing Authority, could start breaking it up. Because Mayor Hofheinz in the 70s, he was the one who really started to put the target on Allen Parkway Village's back. Okay.
Well, diversity is good.
Oh, no, you want diversity, but not if it's designed to undermine solidarity. Okay. The resident council at Allen Parkway Village fought back against the demolition of that 1,000-unit public housing complex for almost 20 years. Okay. Under the leadership of Lenwood Johnson. Peace and blessings be upon him. He's in the hospital. But unfortunately, over time, once Henry Cisneros became HUD secretary in the 1990s, one of President Clinton's biggest agendas was the destruction of public housing. Okay, it was one of the deals that he cut with Republicans in Congress. That's what gave us welfare reform in 1996. It gave us the crime bill in 94. It gave us NAFTA. It gave us the so-called Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998, a law that most people don't want to talk about, but that's the law that put in the law, federal law, 1 strike and you're out, and a work requirement, okay, among other things. And then, of course, the repeal of Glass-Steagall and other things. So we now live in a full-blown neoliberal era where the idea of public provision of housing is anathema. It's all about the private sector, and it's now literally seen as virtuous to destroy public housing, give those public monies and entitlements to private developers who will not produce housing anywhere near at the affordability level that exists currently. And we see this as a good thing.
Who? And they should ask the people. They should ask the people. Before we go forward, I want to just say to the producers, about last year sometime, Pokey, he introduced a video to us right here in East Austin. And if you can find that video for us and air it before we go, that would be a really good thing. It's a rapper. He's rapping about his hood, and he's talking about all the gentrification and things that's happening. So it's around the Pan Am area. So, Pokey, if you can pull up that video, that would be really good. So let's come here now, because the people that live in these projects, we need to know, we need to share with them what it is, if anything, they can do about their living situation. I mean, of course, go down to the city
Get ready to
council.
move.
I mean, get ready to move.
Get ready to move.
There is no plan. Well, there is no plan, period, right now. I mean, the housing authority still needs, for instance, at Rosewood, even at Chalmers, they still need to come up with the capital. There still needs to be the financing. And developers have to be, given the sugar, the entitlements, and the other sorts of things that will allow them to make money there. Okay, and then of course there will be public money and other sorts of things to entice these people to produce the product that we want. From the resident perspective, there is no plan in place for what's going to happen to them or their families. Based upon what we know from other housing projects, from the dislocations at Allen Parkway Village, at Kentwood, in Chicago, at Cabrini, I mean, the list is endless. These people will be displaced, they will be given a Section 8 voucher and said goodbye.
Well, if they're given a Section 8 voucher, at least they can find a home.
Can they? The
Well,
rent is too
maybe.
damn high.
Maybe.
Absolutely right.
What's the maximum you can get with a Section 8 voucher?
That I don't know.
It's a little under $1,300.
Ooh.
Try to find a
that's
3
not-
or 4 bedroom
It's
apartment.
not going to cut in Austin. I know that.
Well, there's a, I want to be clear, they voted to preserve 8 buildings, okay? That was a compromise between the city and their people, and also the residents, because let's face it, they're being kicked out, these people are afraid, and I understand where they're coming from. I mean, you're sitting there, you're poor, you got substandard living conditions, and all these folks with money is talking about you. So, it was threats, but they made a decision to try to say what they have. Now, we can address some of that. They're going to redevelop most of the complex. Part of our job is how do we ensure now by enforcing laws that we protect our citizens? We can do that now because of the Fair Housing Act. The problem is, looking at Fred's work here, is that, see, we have a major problem with the city council.
Y'all do?
We have a major problem. In 2013, we voted for a 10-1. Listen to me.
I say that because you're on the.
What are you talking about? Wait, Nelson is serious now.
This is important because we voted for a 10-1 city council. We have to understand what that meant, okay? So that meant that black people and brown people have to work together. You got 4 votes. You need 2 more. So if we fulfill that promise and work together on these issues like that, we can apply some pressure. The problem is, though, we don't understand the concept behind 10-1. You got people going in all kinds of different directions. So it's partially our fault. To really understand political, we got some power and use it together. We can't stop energy stuff like Code Next, for example. We're finding from the outside in. Look at the city council. What are they saying for the most part? This whole thing was get off the ground. Rich folks, $8.5 million. Now all of a sudden, because of opposition in the organization, they're asking us, what do we think? Well, that should have happened 2 years ago. So what I'm saying is we're not hopeless. We're not helpless. We have to organize and understand how the government works. This is not 1928. This is not the at-large system that Arthur B. DeWitt is trying to change. We now got 3 Hispanics, 1 black on the city council.
Okay.
You got 4 votes. You need 2 more. So why can't we organize and change some of this stuff based on policy?
Well, let me make a quick point here. When I was working in Houston at Allen Parkway Village, I did not work for the Houston Housing Authority. Do you know who I worked for? I worked for the Resident Council of Allen Parkway Village. I worked for Lenwood Johnson and his Resident Council. And I was accountable to them. How could they pay me How did they have a budget? Well, one of the wonderful things about public housing is that it encourages democracy. It encourages democratic administration of the housing. It's public housing. It's not private housing. It's public housing.
But do we have one of
Residents have a
those
say.
councils here in Austin?
Every housing project is supposed to have a resident council, and it's supposed to be powerful. Now, did you know that the housing authority is required to set aside a certain percentage of the rent and subsidies that they receive in order to provide financing for the resident council?
Really?
And that the resident council controls that money at its discretion, not the housing authority. That's how I got paid in Houston, okay, as a consultant.
Is there such a council here?
He said it should be.
This is ensconced in
it's-
federal law and procedure. This is
It's
not
provided.
discretionary.
It's provided for in the law, but does it exist in fact?
No, of course not. Rosewood did not have a resident council for many years, a functioning one. Okay, you could argue that the one that it has now has been completely colonized by HACA and its staff and administrators who have a tight-fisted control over what those people can even see in terms of information. I myself have
No,
been banned
well,
under threat of arrest.
That plays into
They
something
banned
Nelson
you.
said
I
earlier
can see them banning
about
you.
applying legal and other pressure that we can't.
You made the
such
right
as we
point,
can
Mike.
do.
You said why. Well, the problem is you got this ambiguous Austin Housing Authority and the City Council. They're in bed together when it's convenient. The problem is it's the City Council's job to protect these residents. But see, we don't enforce anything. If we don't enforce stuff, it's not going to happen. That's why I say now we got folks that we have elected. You need to ask them, look, what are you doing to address this? Until we hold these people accountable that we elect, we're spinning our wheels. Because you're right, fundamental question. Why is this allowed to take place? Because our elected officials are not enforcing the law. That's the problem.
And
Well,
they're not
they
even
need to get
fact-checking the
people.
basic claims of the housing.
I had when I spoke to Pokey earlier about this particular show, I happened to call, you and I sat on the African American Resource Advisory Commission together. I called KT, and he said he didn't have a firm opinion on what was happening. Is there anything that your commission could do, or people could come to your commission and help get some stuff started?
Sure. You know, Dr. McGhee's been out a couple of times. But see, here's the problem. The problem is, when we first start this commission to have more independence, now it's an advisory body to the City Council. We can advise these folks, we do all the time, what we think should happen. The problem is, who on the council is going to put these kind of ideas into motion? Nobody. Because primarily, as Dr. McGhee said a while ago, to fight these kind of issues, you got to be a hostile core government. You've got to stand up like King and other folks did for the folks who are poor, black, and brown. So who in the city of Austin and government is going to do that? Nobody. They can't even make the right arguments.
Yeah.
Look, if you don't make, it starts with making the right arguments. If you can make the right arguments, you have no chance. Now, here's the good news. If we can find and elect intelligent people that can make the right arguments, because you got to win the intellectual arguments, that's a good beginning. We're not even there. We've got to basically expose some of these folks who sit on these councils who don't have a damn clue. They have a $4 billion budget, and you can't write anything with a $4 billion budget? I mean, that's our problem. I could write something.
They've been completely, they have a faith-based, religious belief in the idea that when it comes to the question of housing, that literally giving developers more money will help solve our affordability crisis.
So they're passing the
That's
buck.
not faith-based.
It's essentially they're passing the buck. Is that right,
That is
Nelson?
faith- It is
Oh,
faith.
absolutely. Well, give me one quick example. Let's look at Portland, Oregon, for example, a much smaller black population. Between 1990 and 2000, they displaced almost 10,000 black people. 10,000 people in 10 years. Very small black population. Now look at Austin, Texas. Now, at least in Portland now, they're talking about right to return. They're beginning to address this seriously. This city is way behind. That came from Dr. McGhee in Port Air and other people. I mean, it didn't come from the government. It came from people that live here. At least now we got some traction. But still, man, we're way behind. Things like that. But here's the problem. Where's the money? Where's the budget? Where's Ora Houston? Garza? Kazar? Renteria? They're talking about bonds. I'm not voting no more bonds, man.
Well, we shouldn't.
But listen to what I'm saying, though. You're talking about bonds. How about your budget? Let's talk about the budget.
Well,
Where's the money going to be allocated from? Again, not the right argument. If we're going to address these issues, it needs to come from your budget. Write a policy and reinvest in these issues that need to have attention.
And the city council have never been fiscally responsible. They never have been able to balance the budget.
Well-
but it's the priorities.
Well, they've been fiscally responsible. But
For what?
They've been fiscally
some people.
responsible,
Well-
putting in bicycle lanes and crap
Well,
like that.
I mean, look at Code Next. I mean, think about
mean-
this. What can you do with $8.5 million as a damn study? Then you come back, I said, wait a minute, we don't quite get it, so tell me, what do you want? But, go ahead, man.
It's
No,
really.
I
I'm sorry,
was just
go
going
ahead.
to say that the planning of where our people should be living in the future, according to Austin policies and government, is Austin Colony. Today, you have, they always say that I-35 is a barrier. For me, it was never a barrier. I mean, when I was growing up, I would cross it and come back forth, so I never, but they always, when I always go to the west side, they always talking about a barrier, I-35 being a barrier. Well, now that barrier is moving to 130. See, because again, it's about land.
Right.
The mayor's a realtor, a lawyer, a realtor.
It's
You
eminent
always,
domain
what's
specialist,
that
isn't
lady
it?
up there at UT? State
it?
Representative Goldberg, or what's her name? She used to be a state rep.
Kitchen.
No,
Greenberg.
Greenberg.
Okay.
She and the mayor get together real often to look at how to plan for East
Of
Austin.
course.
So, and every time you bring it up to them, and you let them know that that's what they're doing, they get mad. They retaliate against you politically.
Well, we need to
So-
not vote for him again.
Well, but see, that's the thing. On this public housing, where's Congressman Doggett? A congressman has a very, very,
Well, can I tell you a story about that?
well, but let me finish. A congressman is very, very powerful when he wants to be powerful. Again, in this county, in Travis County, the Democratic Party is run by two millionaires, Watson and Doggett. Bottom line, Watson and Doggett. So, a lot of it, and that's why a lot of people, even in our communities, they think God, Doggett's God. I said, my God, that they don't look at their records, right, of how they're active or inactive and how absent they are on some of these issues. Go ahead.
Well, Representative Doggett, who I've worked with and who I have great regard for, has been unfortunately at best asleep and at worst hostile to the notion of preserving Rosewood Courts and our public housing. Why do I know this? Because I personally reached out to him and asked him. I wrote him a letter, okay?
Did you get a response?
No. Complete silence. And then I had to watch with an unbelievable degree of disconcertment when he inserted himself into the discussion about to historically preserve that damn golf course, the Muni golf course, which is not in his district now.
Well,
He doesn't represent that golf course anymore. He does represent Rosewood Courts. That is in his current district. Okay? So this isn't a question of theory, it's a fact. Okay? We know where he stands on this issue. He was not willing to exert his political capital in order to preserve a historic public housing project, but just as importantly, the principle that in affordability challenges not seen since the Great Depression, that public housing matters and is part of the solution for any serious discussion of how to solve our affordability challenges. Okay? He too has drunk the neoliberal Clinton Kool-Aid. This worship of markets, this belief that giving, literally taking now at this point, money going to poor people, diverting that money further to rich people, politically connected ones, and that this is good for the people. It isn't. The evidence is overwhelming.
2000,
Certain
smart
people.
growth, 2000. This is the whole Bible in the planning of urban core, density, and everything. You know what I always tell them? The acronym for SMART? Send Mexicans across the river today. Okay? That's what it is, and that's what it's ended up being, because right now we're sitting, according to planners back in the day, in the desired development zone. Okay? And yet it ended up being the desired displacement zone. Because, today, for example, I own two properties right around Cesar Chavez and Holly. combined $14,000 in property taxes. Combined.
Must be worth a lot of money.
You know, it is worth a lot of money. But what good is, and I'm glad you brought that up. I don't mind, go ahead and change my zoning code next, but give me money to build so I can build that two-story home and that flatbed in front of my house. And at the end of the day, if I falter whatever, you're going to get it back. But see, that's the other thing about housing. They've reduced home ownership. See, because a lot of people that live in the projects and rent Section 8 or whatever, when it comes to zoning issues or issues that affect their community, they don't have a voice. Because, you know, they don't get a public notice and say, hey, you know, come speak on this issue.
Well, what can we
Because
tell the
they're on-
public
they're-
now? What can we tell the public now to do? Because we're at a critical time and stage.
Support the 6-point People's Plan and the Poor People's Campaign.
And also, there's a community, not commodity, as a group out there saying, here's what we can do. These folks have money, Fred Lewis and those people, Peg Young and those people, Linda Curtis. So there's an organized campaign. We just turned in 32,000 signatures. Well, this is going to be on the ballot now if it passes the legal muster. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
But here's the other thing I wanted to hit Fred's point real quick. You know, regarding the Congress people, if your city council is supporting that position, they're not going to go against them. So our task is, we got to force the city council, we should have, to take an issue on this thing, do the right thing. We didn't. So I can't blame those guys for that because they're going to follow local government. So your local folks who you vote for have got to represent your interests. And our problem is, if you're going to vote for folks who vote against your interests, then it's really your problem. So the key is going to be education and mobilization. Right now, it's late in this argument. You know that.
Oh, yeah.
It's very late.
I was gonna
But
say
there's
the
still
bus.
things people can do. They can do some things still. And the kids, your government. You cannot elect people that oppose this stuff.
Exactly.
But about your question, Mike, and this bothers me because, you know, I don't care what party you belong to. My question is always why. See, we don't never ask why. And that ought to be the first damn question.
Well,
Because then you got to answer it, right? But these folks do all these things. We see the end result. Like right now, for example, we got enough money right now to address low-income housing in Austin, Texas. And my question again is, if that's an issue for black and brown people, we got 4 votes, then what's the problem?
Let me say this, having worked for an elected official, okay, having been there, in government, working with government. You mentioned working together. We ended up with, 4 minorities, 3 Latinos and an African American. We should have a coalition or whatever. But today, if you look beyond those individuals, look inside the House. Delia Garza has Jackie Goodman working in her office. Hello? You know, Pio Renteria has dogged staff working in his office. Hello? You know, so it's this type of Austin is not only have the issue of racism, it also has an issue of political racism.
of course.
Well,
You
I
know,
mean,
and-
can I just point out something, a couple of things? We have, this is the city council's conception of leadership on these questions that you're bringing up. One is the Spirit of East Austin Initiative, which now has a webpage, okay, but you can't actually submit community comments, okay? And the recent housing justice agenda offered by those 3 city council members that you talked about.
Yeah.
These are not going to work, not in 2018 in Austin, Texas, because the game is up, okay? People are hurting, people are in pain, and identity politics and charity are not going to get the job done anymore. Paying leaders off, putting them inside your office, giving them posh jobs with politically connected people in the real estate industry or anywhere else, that's not going to work any longer. Okay, Austin has grown to the point, and we are now at a place politically where it's time for some real talk. And the political choices, the hard ones.
You mentioned
have
2
to be
things,
fixed.
Fred. One is the Spirit of East Austin. This is 3 years in. What's the problem? No money, 0. The mayor's task force on institutional racism, extensive, no money. But once again, if that's the topic, then what are the black and the brown folks? Because I would think, number one, if that's what you want to do, man, my vote ought to be here, and I'm going to bring you resources. So you get all these ideas that have been led by the mayor, but no money.
But no resources
No resources.
to make anything
resources.
happen.
Zero.
Charity.
And that's a budget issue.
And we have a $3 billion budget.
Because the
Okay.
private sector can do
$4
it.
billion
You have to-
budget.
You gotta give
$4
them-
billion budget.
But see, here's the thing.
And not a dime for
today's
zero.
council.
Zero.
Today's
Zero
council. mayor tells you, well, you want money, you go to the Hispanic quality of life. You want money, you go to the African American quality of life.
But all those commissioners can
I
do is make
understand.
recommendations and
I understand,
suggestions.
but
I've been
this
there.
is where they channel you to, okay?
Okay.
Then you look at it from a bigger perspective, the bigger picture, $4 billion, and here they have us arguing over a measly, what, not even $1 million, $2 million per commission or whatever?
Again, man,
What was it?
if we make the right
180
argument,
or something like
we
that?
have to make the right argument. Now,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is really, let's be frank about this.
Yeah.
I don't care who they have in the offices, frankly, but here's the end result. What has Gaza written on these kind of issues in terms of resources? What is Rental Real Road? What is the Oral Houston? You see, when you look at what KAZI, they're not writing anything, man.
They're not.
Nothing. So that's your problem right there.
Because they have someone
Well,
telling them.
next is the answer.
I understand that. Do they really think that, Fred? Do
They do.
they really think that?
They do.
Okay.
I sincerely believe,
Money.
I mean, when you look at the housing justice agenda, when you actually read what they submitted, what was
Right.
put before the public,
Right.
okay, it combines elements of our 6-point people plan with the agenda of the people pushing code next, okay? And in order to get to a place where you support something like this and call it a justice agenda, you literally have to have a fundamentalist, new urbanist, smart growth inspired religious belief in the power of markets to solve complicated social questions. Everything else will be a mystery to you unless you fundamentally understand the difference between liberalism and neoliberalism, and this is the fundamental difference. The fundamental difference is that Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt were like, we're going to make government do it, we're going to tax rich people, and we're going to build the damn thing ourselves. Now, private entities can manage it at some point, but the money will be there. Neoliberalism does not believe this. Neoliberalism, alongside conservatism, believes government is the problem, not the solution. Okay? Unless you are clear about this, you will be confused.
Well, here's the deal. The people in Chalmers, Rosewood, and Santa Rita courts, those 3 projects they have got to stand up, and they really need to take a field trip down to city council and see their representatives. They've got to make a stand.
They were down there,
Listen,
but supporting it.
They did, but see, here's a problem, and Fred knows this. The problem is, those folks are struggling day to day. And as they said in their testimony, they want quality housing. That's what they want. And this deal that these guys voted on, Preserve Rosewood, what they voted on really was to get those folks what they wanted. They're going to do a few repairs in their homes and houses and apartments, and that's kind of what they want.
Band-Aid it.
And they're afraid to fight anything. That's only one small battle. The battle is much bigger than that. And so you can't, and I'm just honest about this. I mean, these folks bully anybody. If you got money, you tell folks to do it in this city. Imagine being poor in Rosewood and fighting these people. You're going to fight the city council? I don't think so. So let's give them a little credit. I understand where they're coming from, because we're going to fight these people. One quick point about what Fred said a while ago about what the liberals believe. See, I don't think they believe that. I think it's very clear. If you stand up in this city and have a social justice agenda for poor black and brown people, somebody's going to highly oppose you. I think that's the motivation, is the fear. You can't tell me people are that stupid. They know what's right and wrong. So I don't buy that. I think when you stand out, like we do in our community in civil rights, but they really can't touch me. They don't pay me. But if you're on the city council and you say, you know what, I'm sick of this crowd. We want low-income housing for this city. We're way late. And distance yourself from these people that got money and power. They're going to come after you politically. I understand that. But they're not stupid. Give them a little credit. They're not dumb.
Yeah, they are.
What can
No, they're not.
the tenants do? What can the people do that are being affected
The
by
tenants,
this? They need to march down.
they told you, no, because they're not going to march against their interests. They already told you what they want. They listen.
Well, by now, they just want a roof over their head.
They want that place to be up to standard, where they can have air conditions and have a decent quality of life. Frankly, they're not concerned about history.
Well, I don't buy that.
I'm telling you what. I mean, I've talked to them. My office is 2 blocks down.
I know.
They're not gonna buy the idea that what happened in 30. They're not buying that. They're saying, Nelson, right now I can barely feed my kids. I barely got running water.
Those people will not be living there in 2 years.
They might,
Yeah, I
you
know.
might be right, but that's not what they see. I'm saying in a practical standpoint,
No,
what they see right now is the water is running, they see some
I hear you,
improvement.
but let me tell you.
Well, they feel secure.
Which is
They
why,
feel secure.
we gotta admit that,
I mean,
which is why they support the city of Austin. That's why they did that.
Well, let me make a couple of points here.
Sure.
Okay, because I've been doing this a long time. I've fought for public housing preservation for many, many
Come on,
years.
we don't have but a few minutes.
And I've
now.
dealt with housing authorities and resident councils all over this country. And I referenced earlier that the residents are largely pawns in the game. And that is what they are. They are pawns in the game. Imagine that the housing authority of the city of Austin, or any housing authority, is your landlord. Have you ever taken a look at a lease that you signed with a housing authority?
Oh, yeah.
There's things in that lease that are not in regular private sector leases, okay? They, in other words, control you in ways that no private person out in the regular marketplace would tolerate for five minutes, okay? Fear. Nelson put his hand on it earlier. Fear. When you need a roof on your head and you are struggling at the edge of existence, you're going to go out of your way to fight for for an abstract idea such as Austin has the oldest public housing in America? No, you need a roof over your head.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, that said, that should not be cynically manipulated by a powerful and completely venal housing authority in, number one, controlling the information that these people see, and number two, keeping them in fear and saying, basically, do what we say
Or-
or else.
Well, where's the attorney?
Look,
that's
we
saying?
get, no, well, but listen. Look, here's a problem, okay? To your argument, if the city council would embrace these people's rights, they could do that. But they have nobody support them right now at all, and they're afraid. And that's the problem we have. And they're not pawns, they've been threatened. That's reality. I understand that. We all understand that, right?
Well, whatever we do, we better do it in about a minute and a half. Well, whenever they find that video,
Oh,
Ma was out, had it on autopilot, and you know what happens when I start pushing buttons?
Oh, it's just audio now?
I know. It's all
I
right.
get to start freestyle? Oh, no, we have the video back, okay. No freestyle on the
There
mic?
we got Mike Lee in 30 minutes. Tell us about it real quick. You got your guest right there.
Oh, yeah, gonna talk about social justice this evening.
10-4. I do appreciate y'all coming down here.
Appreciate it, bro.
It was good. You know, you ain't running off that fast,
Yes,
right?
I have a LULAC meeting.
all right.
You did really well.
Thank you,
Well, we'll have to come back so that we can bring a
We gotta
solution.
finish this. All right, brother, good
Yeah,
to see
We
you,
we
man.
know it's a
Yeah, let's
problem,
talk,
but we've
man.
got to bring a solution to it.
Let's talk about green building, because part of my people's plan to preserve Austin's public housing is to green build Rosewood Courts and turn it into the most energy efficient multifamily housing in Austin.
Sounds
We
like,
can do that.
sounds like
Not
you don't,
just solar.
sounds like you don't be on my
Well
show.
beyond.
Sounds like you don't be on my show in a minute.
Yes, we'll have him back on.
Well,
Well,
done.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, and by the way, there are solutions. There are
Wait, make a
solutions. We need to talk about them. There are solutions.
Stay tuned for Mike Lee. We'll be back next week. I don't exactly, we may not have any, just wing it next week. And we got a lot of Mondays off in May. So it might be June before we get back to something like this.
I don't. I can get them on.
Anyway, bye-bye, folks.
Who was that dude that was sitting over there?
He's on my show. He's gonna be on my show. I'm on.